interested to hear. I'm definitely someone that very much so like I don't if someone talks to me about cancel culture, I definitely think cancel culture exists. I have similar questions I think to Zachary about like how pervasive all of this is on campus, which is why I should go look at your data set. I'm curious to hear like some of the daily bread that you deal with, the stories of what's going on campuses that don't break into the major media,
Yeah.
that that have really convinced you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the scale of the cases is probably, I know that like the individual stories are what gets people's attention, but it was definitely so clearly increasing throughout my career, and particularly accelerating in 2017, that we were just confident that if we start polling about this, it's going to at least partially reflect kind of like what we've actually seen, and indeed it has. When we asked professors, we did a big poll of professors asking them if they've been punished or threatened with punishment for their academic freedom, and that includes like what they teach, what they publish, and what they say in class. 1/6 of them said that they had. And I've gotten a couple of people, I guess, who don't know history very well, being kind of like, "Oh, that's not that bad." I'm like, "That's insane! That's tens of thousands of professors." We did the same thing with students this past fall, and we found about 10%, 1 in 10. That's over 1 million students. There's nothing even vaguely close to that in history. As far as cases that we know about, and we talk about this in Canceling the American Mind, since we designate cancel culture as beginning around 2014, when we noticed something different happening, that just more students were getting together, more administrators were getting together and signing petitions against their own professors. That really accelerated in 2017. That's one of the reasons why I keep on pointing to 2017, but the seeds were apparent, in 2014. And we found well over 1,000 attempts to get professors punished, and overwhelmingly concentrated in the top 10 schools in the country, and about 80 of the top 200 schools in the country. Like more than half of the cases that we're familiar with are concentrated, in those about 100 schools, all towards the top. And about 2/3 of those more than 1,000 professors were punished in some way, and almost 200 of them were punished. And that was as of last July, by the way. To put that in perspective, the standard number for professors fired during the Red Scare, it's about, there was a massive study done at the time, right at the end of the Red Scare. They found about 63 professors fired for either being communist or having communist beliefs, with an additional almost 40 of them being punished for belief overall. And so that's about 100. So you're talking about a situation where, of the cases that we already know about, you're talking about twice the number of professors fired. And also, as I just published in Reason magazine, we have way too many sort of conformity inducing mechanisms throughout the entire academic process. You're talking about, whereas like back during the Red Scare, the law wasn't even clear that you couldn't fire a professor for being communist. Like a lot of deans who fired professors were like, "Yeah, these guys are ideologues. We don't have to keep them." And of course, the law only became clear right at the end of the Red Scare, which is one of the reasons why, by the way, people count the Red Scare as ending in 1957. That's because Sweezy v. New Hampshire happened in 1957, which is the first case really establishing academic freedom. So in terms of the data, it's amazing that they're able to find this many professors in the first place, given how politically homogenous the situation is on campus, and given how many ways they can get away with sort of punishing professors without having to go as drastically as firing them.
So I'm curious about something. You earlier said you consider yourself on the left.
Mm-hmm.
How do you account for the fact that so many people on the left think that fire is so far on the right?
I have to, after a while, not give a damn about that anymore. Because it's one of those things where I spent 10 years writing for the Huffington Post trying to convince the left that there's a problem on campus. And I tried to use cases that were highly sympathetic to the left, because we have plenty of examples. And I say this sometimes to people on the left. It's like, listen, if all you want to do is help us out with the cases that agree with your politics, great. Help us out with those cases. Because there's plenty of them, by the way. I don't think that's particularly principled, but okay. We'll take the help on the ones you agree with us on. The staff itself leans more to the left than to the right. The cases we take, people will constantly do this on social media, because like, where was fire on this case? And it's like, we're literally quoted in the article you just sent around calling us out. There is such a resistance to the idea that cancel culture is real, that there's a free speech problem on campus, that there are just some people that you can't reach. And part of me has to just be like, okay, like, listen, all we can do is be perfectly consistent on this. And if you're not paying attention, I can't really care. But that doesn't mean that we don't stop trying and reaching out. And this is something that I wrote about, pretty recently. I call this fascio casting, that essentially, I don't like your opinion. You're right wing. Bing. This is something that I did back in law school, back in 97. And it was a habit that was definitely much more among elites, to use that word. When I got to a place like Stanford, suddenly I realized that people would warn me, like, that thinker's conservative. And that worked on me, because I'd be like, I'm not going to read their book because, those are bad people. How childish that way of thinking about things was something that I feel deeply ashamed of later. There are entire authors I didn't read because people had claimed they're right wing, including people like Camille Paglia, who I'm kind of like, Camille Paglia is a lot of things, but easy to define politically. It is not among them. She's her own person, to say the least. But also people like Thomas Sowell, who is conservative, but nonetheless, I think actually has some valuable insights. And that tactic has worked so well that now you see people on campuses, and including scholars who should know better, where the entire substance of their scholarly articles is basically being like, well, those are right wingers. And I'm like, okay, first of all, no. A lot of these people you're talking about actually aren't. I read a recent one that just blew me away, where the claim was that not only are these guys right-wingers, they are neo-Confederates, and their dupes include the New York Times and the American Civil Liberties Union, because they admit that there's like some kind of free speech problem. Like, okay, these are just insults in the form of a scholarly article that's relying on a childish tactic of labeling something that a bad name, then you don't have to think about it anymore. So I've been increasingly calling this out, because it's one of these things where it's kind of like, no, I'm not actually conservative. I'm not a fan of Trump, but I hate having to say that, because what if I was? Like, does that suddenly magically mean that anything I said doesn't count? And the answer seems to be implicitly, kinda. That this is unworthy of people who think of themselves as smart. So we have to stop this, this fascio casting kind of thing, where we just kind of like, oh, I really don't want people to listen to you, so now you're a fascist.